There's so much more to Harry's 5th year at Hogwarts than what the movie really shows. If you're a fan of the books, then you'll know all about this, but if it's been a while since you've read them, or if you've never read them at all, then you're missing out on countless moments that help build our characters and the wizarding world in general. Like the other classes that Harry and his friends attend, or their fellow classmates having opinions of their own instead of just staying silent so the main trio gets all the lines. In fact, there's a chapter near the beginning of the Order of the Phoenix that is 30 pages long, but we only see about 10% of it in the movie. It's all about Harry's entire first day back at Hogwarts, and in today's video, I'm gonna reveal every single insane detail from that chapter that never got put in the movie. My name is Gibby, and welcome back to episode 65 of Movies vs. Manuscripts Harry Potter Edition. Welcome to my channel, Fact or Fantasy Harry Potter, a place where we talk about all things wizarding. And don't worry, I know that a massive number like 65 can scare people away, but trust me, this video alone is worth the watch. However, if you enjoy deep dives into the wizarding world and the story of Harry Potter in general, then once you're done watching this one, I've got a bunch of helpful playlists on my channel that'll guide you through years 1 through 4 of the series, which I've already dissected and found all the differences for. In fact, a lot of people in the community say that it's a great companion to the books if you're reading along for the first time or for the 10th time. So feel free to use this series as a sort of book club as you go chapter by chapter. Anyway, enough of my plugs. Like I said, in this video, we're going page by page through chapter 12 of the Order of the Phoenix and comparing it to its corresponding scene in the movie. Per usual, I'll cover all the differences across our 4 major categories, which are characters, timeline, location, and plot. But first, in order to best understand the changes, we need to refresh our memory on what the movie says happened. And today, it's pretty short. After Seamus and Harry have their little fight in the Gryffindor common room, Harry goes to bed, has a bad dream, and then our scene today picks up with when the movie cuts straight to their first Defense Against the Dark Arts class. We see some of the kids goofing off and having fun, and then Umbridge walks in and the tone shifts. She immediately starts speaking to them like they're toddlers and sends out their books, but before anyone can really start reading, Hermione raises her hand and points out that the new textbook doesn't mention anything about using defensive spells. Umbridge does her trademark little giggle and then says that they'll learn but not use spells in her classroom. Ron and Harry both speak up at this point, and when Harry talks, Umbridge gets mad. They have a little back and forth that culminates in Harry's outburst about Voldemort, and Umbridge gives him detention. And that is where the scene ends, as the movie then immediately transitions to Harry having his detention. But we aren't actually going to go straight to that, because believe it or not, our chapter today literally only corresponds to the short scene in Umbridge's class. As Harry Potter fans know, The Order of the Phoenix is a very lengthy book, and so I can understand why they needed to cut things down for time. However, cutting things means missing out on Harry's entire first day back at Hogwarts, and not only that, but it means limiting this classroom interaction to a short back and forth that results in nothing more than a detention. But what if I told you that multiple other students speak up as well, or that Harry actually gets sent to Professor McGonagall with a letter from Umbridge? Well, if that sounds new to you, or if you just need a reminder, then strap in, because now it's time to dive into our changes, starting with characters, timeline, and location. First up, our character category contains several omissions. Of course, we're missing several professors like Snape, McGonagall, Binns, and Trelawney. But on top of that, we're also missing several students like Fred and George, Cho Chang, and Seamus, Dean, Neville, Lavender, and Parvati. Now, those last 5 kind of fall into their own category because they all have something in common. They are the only other named Gryffindor 5th years. It's believed that there are 5 girls and 5 boys sorted each year, although that itself is up for debate in the fandom. But anyway, my point is that we know the 5 boys: Ron, Harry, Neville, Seamus, and Dean. But we're missing 2 girls, since we only hear about Hermione, Lavender, and Parvati Patil. Just a reminder, Parvati's twin sister Padma is in Ravenclaw in the books. She is not in Gryffindor. I want to once again make it clear that in the book, all of these characters talk. Of course, they don't talk as much as the main trio, because the main trio are the main characters, but J.K. Rowling does a good job of spreading the dialogue to build out the school as if it's a real place, unlike the movies, which essentially default the only speaking parts to Ron, Harry, and Hermione, making it seem like none of their classmates ever have anything to offer verbally. Pretty much in every chapter of the book that includes the school though, one or more of these extra 5 characters have something of value to add. Additionally, I want to point out once again in this series that classes were not held with all of the other Hogwarts houses. You either were on your own with your own house, or you had one other house with you. For example, Potions was always with the Slytherins, but in the movie, you'll see students from all of the houses present. Anyway, moving on to timeline, you can probably guess that our main change here is their removal of Harry's entire day, skipping over all of the other classes and meals and going straight to defense against the dark arts. Which segues us into location perfectly, because our missing locations of course correspond to these missing moments of the chapter. We don't see the History of Magic classroom, the Potions dungeon, Trelawney's tower for divination, or McGonagall's office. Plus, we're missing some staples of the castle like the Great Hall, the courtyard, and of course Gryffindor Tower. But now that I've teased you with all of the character, timeline, and location changes, we can head into our final category, which is plot. And that's where we get to dive into the details and reveal exactly what was inside these missing pages of the story. But first, let me remind you that I can't go word for word through the dialogue, because that would take forever. As always, I'll mention any key dialogue that is missing or altered and affects the plot or a character. But if you're wanting to relive these moments for yourself word for word, then I highly recommend you check out the audiobooks on Audible. I've partnered with Audible to give you your first month for free, which includes one free audiobook of your choice, and you can cancel at any time. So check out the link in the description to claim your first audiobook for free and support the channel at the same time. And speaking of support, I want to give a massive shout out to Jason, Joshua, Timothy, RoboSteve, Drix, Andy, Maha, and the rest of my incredible Patreon and YouTube members who help make these videos possible every month. As always, you guys are the best. Now with that being said, buckle up and let's dive into our plot changes. To start things off for our plot changes, per usual, we have a lot of missing context that happens before what the movie actually shows. A lot of times, as you know if you've watched this series before, J.K. Rowling will start the chapter by giving us some background before the main plot of the chapter really kicks in. But the difference this week is that there's tons of stuff that happens before Dolores Umbridge's first Defense Against the Dark Arts class. While I could technically lump all of this under one massive umbrella omission of things that were removed before the class, for the sake of organization, I'm just going to separate these out. So our first change, or what I'm going to consider our first change, is Harry's morning in Gryffindor Tower. We read in the book that he wakes up and sees Seamus dressing at top speed, leaving the dorm before Harry even has time to put his socks on. If you remember in the last episode, we talked about how Seamus and Harry got into an argument, and obviously Seamus doesn't want to be in the same room as him. Harry is well aware of this, and even says loudly enough for Seamus to hear on his way out, does he think he'll turn into a nutter if he stays in the same room with me too long? Dean Thomas tells him not to worry about it, which is slightly comforting, but since Dean is Muggle-born, he and his parents aren't super involved in the political drama of the Wizarding world at the moment. Anyway, despite Dean, Ron, and Neville trying to comfort Harry, he's still upset and playing perfectly into the edgy Harry vibe of the 5th year. After this, they go downstairs to the common room and Hermione spots a notice on the board that reads "Gallons of Galleons. Pocket money failing to keep pace with your outgoings? Like to earn a little extra gold? Contact Fred and George Weasley." Hermione gets mad and tells Ron that as prefects, they're gonna have to talk to Fred and George later, telling them that they can't use first years and other young students to test out their contraband at school. Unsurprisingly though, Ron is not keen on this at all, as he doesn't want to tell his older brothers what to do. As we touched on in the last episode, the whole concept of Ron and Hermione being prefects is massively omitted in the movies. In the books, this is a huge narrative arc throughout the entire year that's gonna come up over and over again in our episodes, as their new duties constantly put them at odds with Fred and George's pranks and other things as well. And speaking of the twins, by the way, this bulletin board notice is just the start of a massive year-long plotline regarding their future business plans and the skiving snack boxes. The entire 5th book weaves in how well their products sell and their ultimate plans for the joke shop, but we don't really get any of that in the movie. It's literally just them briefly testing products on kids in the beginning, and then their famous fireworks exit at the end, which we'll cover in a future episode. Anyway, Hermione takes the sign down, and as they talk, she mentions that she isn't surprised about Seamus, revealing that Lavender Brown was also expressing her doubts about Voldemort's return in the girls' dorm. Harry instantly gets upset, but Hermione quickly shuts it down, telling him to stop jumping down their throats and reminding him that she and Ron are on his side. And finally, to wrap up this first morning omission, as they walk out of Gryffindor Tower and head down to breakfast, people are actively avoiding Harry in the halls, which obviously just makes him feel even worse and continues to set the tone for what society is currently thinking about the boy who lived. Our next omission and plot change takes place once the trio gets down to the Great Hall for breakfast. One of the key details here is when Angelina Johnson comes up to Harry and announces that she has been made the new Gryffindor Quidditch captain, since Oliver Wood has graduated and left Hogwarts. She points out that because Wood is gone, they desperately need a new keeper, so she's gonna hold tryouts on Friday at 5 p.m. She expects Harry and the rest of the team to be there so they all can get a feel for who the new keeper might be. Right after this, the Morning Post arrives, and Hermione pays an owl for a copy of the Daily Prophet. Harry understandably is annoyed by this, but Hermione explains that she likes to know what the enemy is saying, and after a quick scan, she confirms that there is no new slander about Harry or Dumbledore. Then, the real dread sets in as they receive their fifth-year schedules. In some ways, their fifth-year schedules are like the second antagonist of the Harry Potter series, because not only are they having to fight a Dark Lord, but Dumbledore and McGonagall and the rest of the people who know Voldemort has returned are insisting that the trio continue their schooling at the pace they would have before. Ron groans over their absolutely brutal Monday lineup. They have History of Magic, Double Potions, Divination, and Double Defense Against the Dark Arts, which is essentially a gauntlet of all their least favorite classes. History of Magic is taught by Professor Binns and is notoriously boring, as we'll see in a second. Double Potions is horrible because they're stuck with the Slytherins for twice as long as usual, and it's taught by Snape, so it really can't get much worse than that. Divination is always a pain because they hate Trelawney and how she always predicts Harry's death and thinks that everything she says is fraudulent and annoying. And finally, while Defense Against the Dark Arts is normally a good class that they look forward to, they don't have a great track record with past teachers, considering the previous year their teacher was a Death Eater. And now they have this Umbridge woman from the Ministry who they aren't too psyched about. If you'll notice, Defense Against the Dark Arts is the very last thing on their class list, which means all of those other classes happen before the movie even picks up with Umbridge's class. So we've got plenty of missing details to cover from them today. While looking over this brutal schedule, Ron actually jokes about wishing Fred and George would hurry up and get those skiving snack boxes sorted so he could skip a class. And right on cue, the twins walk up and they joke about a Hogwarts prefect wanting to skip classes. Ron shows them the horrible Monday lineup, and Fred concedes that that's a fair point, offering him some nosebleed nougat for a cheap price. When Ron asks why it's so cheap, George admits that they haven't figured out how to stop the bleeding yet, so it's currently heavily discounted. Ron quickly declines, deciding he'd rather sit through the lessons than bleed out to death. At this point, Hermione speaks up about the skiving snack boxes, warning the twins that they can't advertise for testers on the Gryffindor notice board. George looks astonished at her command, but Hermione asserts that both she and Ron are laying down the law, though Ron quickly mutters to leave him out of it, which makes the twins snigger. Fred and George tell her that she'll be singing a different tune pretty soon, warning them that the fifth year is notorious for causing mental breakdowns due to the heavy workload, and she'll be begging for a snack box before long. This transitions into a larger conversation about the twins' plans. The trio asks about their OWLs, which weren't great compared to their siblings, but Fred and George explain that they feel their futures lie entirely outside of the world of academic achievement. They even admit that they debated not coming back for their 7th year at all, but only returned because Percy had already upset their mother so much and they didn't want to add on to her stress. But it's obvious that they are totally checked out academically. Ron and Hermione, however, are deeply confused. They wonder how on earth Fred and George are funding their business. Ingredients for skiving snack boxes, advertising, and supposedly securing premises for a shop aren't cheap. And as we all know, the Weasleys certainly aren't made of galleons. Now, if you remember from our Goblet of Fire coverage last season, this is a massive detail the movies completely ignored. Harry gave the twins his 1,000 galleon Triwizard Tournament winnings to start their joke shop. As the twins brag about their business, Harry shoots them a look that clearly tells them to shut up, as he still hasn't told Ron or Hermione what he did with the money. Shortly after the twins leave, Harry shifts the focus by asking if the 5th year really is as tough as everyone says, which leads to a discussion about their future careers. Ron mentions how it would be cool to be an Auror, and Harry agrees, but Hermione says that she wants to do something more impactful, perhaps taking Spew even further. And that is where their breakfast ends, leading us directly into our next omitted moment, their History of Magic class. To be honest, on theme with most History of Magic classes and Professor Binns, there's not a lot that goes on here. The only thing I'll share is that they are learning about the history of giant wars, which could be a little bit of a nod to where Hagrid is at this moment. They noticed that morning at breakfast in the Great Hall that Hagrid still hadn't returned, and they hadn't seen him the night before, as we discussed in the last episode. They don't know where Hagrid is, but the last thing they heard is that he was doing something for Dumbledore a few months ago, and they haven't had any updates since. He's certainly not in his hut outside. So this is a small little detail, but J.K. Rowling does make a point of saying that their lesson was on giant wars, which Harry thinks might have been interesting if it was taught by anyone other than Professor Binns. As a quick reminder, Professor Binns is the ghost professor at Hogwarts who has been teaching history of magic for who knows how long. The running joke is that he literally died in the teacher's lounge one day and just got up and went to class without even noticing that his spirit left his body. He essentially doesn't even know he's dead. There's not much more to say about this portion, but I had to mention it since it's a chunk of their day that was removed from the movie. Perhaps for a good reason in this case. That being said, our next omission is a lot more entertaining, and it features another encounter with Cho Chang. If you remember, Cho actually tried to approach Harry on the Hogwarts Express, but she walked in right when Neville had accidentally squirted goo from his plant all over him. So it was incredibly bad timing. Now, during a break in the courtyard after their History of Magic lesson, Cho approaches Harry on her own, without her usual group of giggling friends. This makes Harry very self-conscious, but he's relieved that he isn't covered in stink sap this time. Hoping to strike up a conversation, Harry asks Cho how her summer was, but he immediately regrets it, considering that her boyfriend Cedric literally died right before summer started. Before things get too awkward though, Ron aggressively interrupts to question Cho about the Tornadoes badge pinned to her robes. The Tornadoes are a professional Quidditch team, and since Ron is obviously obsessed with the sport, he essentially accuses Cho of being a bandwagon fan. We get the impression that the Tornadoes are the best in the league that year, but they haven't always been that good. So Ron considers it an absolute crime for people to just jump on the bandwagon now that they're winning. Cho defends her longtime support though, stating that she's been a fan since she was a kid, and then promptly walks away. This leads Hermione to furiously scold Ron for his lack of tact and for completely ruining Harry's chance to talk to Cho alone, which quickly devolves into Ron and Hermione bickering with each other once again. This has been a repeated thing since they got back to school. This constant bickering ends up making Harry quite upset later on, but for now it just perfectly ruins what could have been a nice moment for him. Next, we move on to the dungeons where the trio has double potions with the Slytherins. Once again, they're reminded of how intense their 5th year is going to be when Snape tells them that he expects at least an acceptable OWL grade from everyone, even if they don't continue his class for their NEWTs. And he says this while shooting pointed looks at Harry and Neville, his two least favorite students. Snape essentially puts the instructions on the blackboard for how to brew a complex draft of peace and leaves them to it. Honestly, this is a great example of what average teaching in a potions class at Hogwarts might have been like. I get how this could be a little boring on screen, but by their 5th year, they don't really need hand-holding. They just show up, Snape would say make this potion, they try to brew it, get a grade on it, and then he'd assign an essay related to that potion for homework. Unsurprisingly, Harry struggles with this complicated potion and accidentally forgets to add a specific ingredient at the end, syrup of hellebore, because he failed to read the 3rd line of the instructions on the blackboard. But instead of letting Harry submit his poorly made concoction, Snape humiliates him in front of the whole class and then uses a vanishing spell to completely get rid of it, meaning that Harry gets 0 marks for the day. This is incredibly unfair, and Hermione points that out as they head to lunch afterwards, noting that Crabbe's potion was horrible, but at least he got to turn something in. Hermione mentions that she thought Snape would be a bit fairer now that he's in the Order of the Phoenix, but Ron immediately argues that Dumbledore is crazy to trust someone who used to be a Death Eater. And this is the moment where Harry finally cracks. Because they start arguing once again, and sick of their constant bickering, he furiously tells them both to shut up, abandons his meal entirely, and storms out of the Great Hall. After this climactic moment at lunch, we move on to our next omitted moment, which is their divination class. After storming out of the Great Hall, Harry heads up to the North Tower corridor, completely ignoring Sir Cadogan, who is trying to pick a fight with him along the way. Harry simply sits alone under the trapdoor to Trelawney's classroom, waiting for everyone else to arrive. Also, just a quick note, remember that Hermione dropped this class, so it's just Ron and Harry in here. Eventually, the class starts and Professor Trelawney welcomes everyone back, instructing the students to pair up and interpret each other's dreams using the Dream Oracle. Harry and Ron, having no real dreams they actually want to share, decide to invent fake ones instead. Now, as we know, Harry is actually having real dreams, and thankfully, this is a detail the movie didn't ignore. In fact, right before the Umbridge scene in the movie, we get a quick glimpse of Harry having one of his restless dreams. It's probably the most important narrative thread of his 5th year, so I'm glad they kept it in. But in the book, Harry is extremely reluctant to tell Ron about them in the class. So he lies to Ron, claiming that he can't remember his dreams either. And per usual, they spend their divination class just making stuff up, exactly like they did the year before and the year before that. And now we come to the most important part of the entire episode, which is Umbridge's first Defense Against the Dark Arts class. This scene in the movie is less than 3 minutes long, whereas in the book, it's multiple pages. So obviously, there's a lot of details left out. To start things off, the first change is how Umbridge forces the students to address her. When she says, "Good afternoon, class," they give a lackluster reply, and she treats them like toddlers, instructing them that they must reply with, "Good afternoon, Professor Umbridge." Later in the class, she goes even further, stating that anytime she asks a question, they must reply with, "Yes, Professor Umbridge," or "No, Professor Umbridge." The movie shows her speaking to them like children, but in the book, she actively forces them to participate in this demeaning back and forth. The next change happens when she writes the 3 theory-centered course aims on the blackboard, which are understanding the principles underlying defensive magic, learning to recognize situations in which defensive magic can legally be used, and placing the use of defensive magic in a context for practical use. After this, she asks if they all have their books. In the movie, we see her magically send the books out to the class as if providing a brand new curriculum. But in the book, the students already have purchased Wilbert Slinkhart's defensive magical theory from Diagon Alley. She simply instructs them to open their books and read the first chapter in silence. Our next change is how the classroom argument actually unfolds. Instead of just speaking up immediately, Hermione completely refuses to read the chapter. She simply stares at Umbridge with her hand in the air. Harry notes that pretty much everyone in the class eventually gets bored of reading their chapter, so they all start watching Hermione and Umbridge to see who will break first. Finally, Umbridge gets fed up and calls on her. Hermione points out that the course aims don't mention actually using defensive spells, to which Umbridge claims that she can't imagine a situation in her classroom where they would need to use them. Now, the movie gives all the pushback to Ron, Harry, and Hermione, but in the book, several other students get involved. Ron and Dean Thomas argue that they need practical magic to defend themselves, and when Umbridge criticizes their former teachers as irresponsible and specifically calls Professor Lupin a dangerous half-breed, Dean angrily defends Lupin, calling him the best teacher they ever had. Then Parvati Patil speaks up, asking how they're supposed to pass the practical portion of their OWL exams if they only study the theory and have never actually done the magic. It's only after all of this pushback that Harry finally speaks up about Lord Voldemort. Umbridge immediately docks 10 points from Gryffindor and calls him a liar. But since he knows that he's already in trouble, Harry doubles down, bringing up Cedric Diggory and shouting that he fought Voldemort. This, of course, earns him detention. But now this brings us to our final omitted detail of this scene, which is that Harry actually gets kicked out of the class. He doesn't just get detention, Umbridge calls him to the front, writes and seals a letter, and tells him to take it immediately to Professor McGonagall. On his way there, Peeves mocks and annoys him in the corridor, causing a ruckus that brings McGonagall out of her office. Harry hands her the letter, and after reading it, she brings him inside and surprisingly offers him a biscuit from a tartan tin. Instead of scolding him, she tries to explain the gravity of the situation. She tells Harry that while she believes Voldemort has returned, there are much bigger things going on, and Umbridge is not someone to be messed with. Harry gets defensive, arguing that he was just telling the truth, but McGonagall warns him that this is about more than just the truth. It's about the Ministry of Magic actively interfering at Hogwarts. And this is a moment that I kinda wish they would have included in the movie. It would have only taken an extra 60 seconds to add, but it would have helped to build out McGonagall and Harry's relationship and give McGonagall some more screen time, which I think is much needed in this movie. But instead, they cut out his classmates, they cut out Peeves, and they cut out McGonagall, all to keep this interaction between Umbridge and Harry alone, and then they skip straight to detention, which we'll talk about in the next episode, as there's a lot more of their classes and other moments at Hogwarts that were removed in order to cut time to go straight to the detention. But anyway, that wraps up all the changes for today's episode. Which one of these omissions do you regret the most and wish they would have included in the movie? Let me know in the comments below. As always, if you enjoyed, be sure to like and subscribe, and check out the series playlist on my channel to catch up on any episodes you might have missed. Like I mentioned earlier, I've already done books 1 through 4, so you can binge all of those to catch up. As always, Jesus loves you, have a great week, and I'll see you in the next video.